The 2014 Ukraine crisis marked the true beginning of the war with Russia. To understand the present, one needs to understand the past. This holds for the Russia-Ukraine conflict as the events are rooted in what occurred 8 years ago. In this video, we'll talk about how the 2014 Ukraine crisis marked the true beginning of the war with Russia. Welcome back to Military Future. The Russian-Ukraine war is an ongoing war that we've been hearing about since the start of this year. But there's so much more history to it, so let's have a look at what started 8 years ago and how it's escalated so badly. The beginning of the current war is tied to December of 1991, when the dissolution of the long-standing Soviet Union shocked the world. The USSR was suddenly not a thing anymore, and the Russian Federation flag replaced the previous one. The dissolving of the USSR gave rise to 15 independent countries that hadn't self-governed in centuries. Of these countries, Ukraine was the second most influential republic because of its impressive industrial and military capabilities that were inherited from the Soviet era. This separatist movement left behind tons of ammunition, including 1,700 nuclear warheads in Ukraine. A couple hundred warheads were in a ready-to-launch state and could have become intercontinental ballistic missiles. These nuclear weapons possessed by Ukraine were quickly seen as a threat by countries worldwide. Naturally, their destruction became a common interest for several nations. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to disintegrate its nuclear weapons and be a part of the NPT, a treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Under this treaty, Ukraine committed to using nuclear energy for non-violent reasons and never for mass destruction. But Russia felt like it could be attacked, and other nations saw its nuclear capabilities as a serious security threat. Ukraine then went on to sign Budapest Memorandum in the presence of the leaders from Russia, Britain and the US. The agenda from this memorandum was security assurances for these countries that Ukraine in exchange for its declaration as non-nuclear weapons state. Ukraine agreed to this because it had inadequate maintenance budget, and 4 of the parties signed the memorandum. Let's fast forward to the 2004 presidential elections in Ukraine. The 2 contesting candidates were Yanukovych and Yushchenko. The former wanted to cater to Russia, and the latter wished to strengthen ties with the West. In a surprising turn of events, Yushchenko was badly poisoned by TCDD, a toxin found in herbicides a couple of months before the election. Although he survived the assassination, it still made him very sick and demanded recovery time. Meanwhile, Yanukovych won the election, but reports of widespread corruption and threats to the public for gaining votes started to surface. Soon enough, the news leaked and the public was outraged. This gave rise to the Orange Revolution. The protest was so massive that at one time, 19% of Ukraine's population participated in this revolution. This time, the results were reversed, making Yushchenko the winner. But this didn't end well. In the 2010 elections, Yanukovych won. As expected, Yanukovych decided against plans to enter Ukraine into an agreement with the European Union. Hence, he refused to sign the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement and revealed his intentions to join the Customs Union of Russia agreement along with Belarus and Kazakhstan. But this didn't settle well with the masses. People once again took to the streets in Kiev, and this time protests started getting violent. On November 30th, 2013, the police used suppressive measures which only worsened. The protests grew every day, and from January, news of deaths were reported. The protesters dispersed from the Independence Square in Kiev but kept coming back, engaging violently with the police and then retreating. The protests escalated so violently that in mid-February they were called the Revolution of Dignity, comprising nearly 50,000 protesters. On February 22nd, protesters took over the city and the voice of resistance was heard everywhere. Yanukovych fled after seeing the unrest, and the unrest managed to kill 108 people, injuring 1,900 and caused 300 to be missing. The parliament made a historical vote where each member voted in favor of Yanukovych's impeachment, but he had already fled. Yanukovych reappeared in Russia and stated that an organized Nazi-like attempt had overthrown his government, which shall not be accepted. Slowly, his supporters started creating unrest in Donetsk and Luhansk and raised Russian flags over important administrative points in the region. On the other hand, Putin wanted to integrate Crimea back into Russia and, upon getting the opportunity, sent in the troops. His soldiers captured Crimea's main points, did everything they could to isolate Crimea from Ukraine, and Russian flags were seen all over the ever-once Ukrainian parliament. All this happened in a matter of hours, so it was impossible for Ukraine to resist or respond. Putin sent in even more troops to counter the few Ukrainian forces present. Within 1 month, all forces were captured and the rest surrendered, fearing defeat. Just like that, Putin got Crimea. Ukraine's forces tackled the rioters who raised Russian flags in the parliament, but the rioters' gesture was enough to breathe fire into a rising movement. What happened next will shock you. We'll reveal that in a little bit, but remember to comment below your thoughts about Putin's strategy and what you think could have been handled better. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. Let's get back to the video. This pre-existing political divide in Ukraine worsened. Some separatist groups seized the moment to further their aim: the liberation of Donetsk and Luhansk, and their merger with Russia. This happened successfully, and the liberated regions came to be known as Donetsk People Republic, or the DPR, and Luhansk People Republic, or the LPR. Putin extended his support verbally and also sent in weapon assistance. With the received weaponry, some rioters regained control of important landmarks in eastern Ukraine in April. Ukraine launched the Anti-Terrorist Operation, or ATO, to facilitate the efforts to regain the lost landmarks. Evacuation warnings were given to separatist groups before sending in troops to fire. The warnings were paid no heed, mainly because the groups relied on the advanced weaponry that they had received from Russia. They attacked helicopters and came out in battle vehicles whose possession was unknown to Ukraine. After days of warfare, the groups retaliated to Donetsk with fewer casualties than the Ukraine army. However, Ukraine's troops successfully regained control of Donetsk International Airport and the city of Mariupol. Despite all of these separatist forces, Ukraine's forces continued to push through and regain lost ground. Their undertakings were majorly successful, and the plan was to reclaim border control. This news, of course, alarmed the separatist leaders, who pleaded with Putin to increase assistance, which Russia did. A couple of days rolled by and the Minsk agreement was signed by Ukraine, Russia and the DPR as well as the LPR on September 5th. This wasn't the end of the conflict, but the agreement led to some crucial steps. Firstly, a 15-kilometer wide demilitarized border zone was drawn and the lines of control for all parties were determined. Secondly, all foreign mercenaries were directed to leave Ukraine. Thirdly, DPR and LPR were given more independence. And finally, dialogue negotiations and humanitarian convoys were permitted. Sadly, the steps turned out to be not so fruitful due to inaction from both sides, and soon the situation returned to square one, warfare with seemingly no end. From then on, the tensions have only grown. Thousands of people have fled Ukraine, hundreds of children have died, and once beautiful cities are now ruins. Will it get better or worse? No one knows. Battles stretched for 8 years will now only invite despair for the civilians and for the rest of the world. But that is a wrap for today. Check out more videos on the channel on this topic and we'll see you in the next one.